everybody. My name is Nicola Cassidy. You're very welcome along to our webinar today on So You Want to Write a Podcast. This is our last webinar of the series, and I am delighted to welcome along Ronan McQuillan. Hi, Ronan.
What's the crack, guys? How you doing?
Just for anyone that doesn't know, Ronan is my husband. So if we get into
fighting.
a row, that's why. It's just normal. So I'm the Meath Writer-in-Residence for 2020, and I've published 3 novels to date. I write historical fiction, but I have a great interest in all types of writing. And so far, we've had the script, screenplay, we've had the novel, we've had the short story, and today we're having the podcast. And I suppose the reason I picked these to talk about is because I have a great interest in them, but also I think there's a lot of people are interested in these types of media to try and get the word out and try and get their story or their message. This is probably the most technical, I would say, of the webinars, in that we're going to go through all the kind of tech side of things that you need to produce a podcast. But that's because if you're going to be doing it on your own, there's so much more than actually the script and what you're saying. It is about the technical side, isn't it, Ronan?
Absolutely,
you do need to know what you're doing for a podcast.
Yeah, but I think if you have the basics down, I think you're going to be fine. Like you can go down a rabbit hole of maybe technical stuff and equipment and gear and everything else as well, but you really don't need it. You can start it off very, very simple. And
yeah, and I think that's kind of the message today, isn't it? Because it's not to be put off by the technical side of things, that it's all very doable. There is a lot of training kind of videos and everything out there, but we're going to go through the very basics today. And I hope that anyone that is thinking about doing a podcast, is interested in putting their content in a podcast format, will come away feeling that they can do it. And it is very achievable, because there's so many podcasts out there, Ronan, isn't there? Like loads of people are doing it.
Loads of people are doing it. Some might argue that the market's maybe a bit saturated now with a lot of amateur podcasts and that, but with a bit of tweaking, a bit of TLC, you can produce something as good as the top podcasts out there. But just to bear in mind that the top podcasts out there tend to have teams of 20, 30 people working on them, some of them, especially if they're turning out content, daily. Some of them are, especially a lot of the sports ones, they give you live broadcasts daily of what's going on. Just things like that, like bear that in mind. So, and then you have stuff that's absolutely brilliant, not unlike the Blind Boy podcast, which is just a one-man show, but it's the technical ability as well as the ability to talk and interview and everything else as well. So we'll have a little look at some of those, I think.
There's just a comment saying it's hard to hear you. If anyone else is having issues, maybe just put up a comment. But if you just sit a bit closer to the microphone, because you are using a podcast mic.
Yes, I am.
Yeah, it's clear to me. It's clear to me.
Okay, is that better?
So you have to show off your equipment now.
Is that better? No, is that better?
That's better. Okay.
Okay, sorry about that.
Well, look,
I'll turn it up here.
I want to just give your background on it so that people understand why we're speaking today and what your background is. So you are a musician with a band called The Enemies, and we're from Louth, so anybody up here would know the band. And that's why across your social channels, it is Enemies, that if people are wondering where that name comes from. You're a composer, you're a producer and a sound designer. We might explain maybe what a sound designer is as we go along. You're currently completing your master's in audio production and technology. So I know that you're just on your thesis part. So you should be finished that by Christmas.
From the last lap, thankfully.
Yeah. And you also produced the Celtic Soul podcast, More Than 90 Minutes. And we're going to talk about that. We can talk about that now in a second. But that's a new podcast. And I think you said it was only set up June, July. And tell us how many listeners it has already.
Yeah, we were just looking at the stats yesterday, and it's already reaching almost 20,000 listeners across all the streaming platforms and all the podcast platforms. So it's pretty impressive, and
it's for Celtic Football Club, isn't that what it is?
Yeah, well, Andrew Millen is the host, and Andrew's been involved with the club kind of on the periphery. He started off writing a magazine that he sold outside the club, like a fanzine. And he's loads of contributors, people who contribute to the magazine every week. And somebody's saying you're breaking up there, Nikki. Sorry, I'm just reading the comments.
Yeah, just keep going.
That basically, when everything's gone digital now, he's now created a digital magazine, and he also runs live events every day before the live games on a Saturday, in Glasgow before the Celtic football matches. So because the way things are, obviously with the with the lockdown and everything else as well, he obviously can't do any live events. So what he's done is he's started the podcast because he has this endless resource of contacts from the club, from players to people who work within the club to just fans, everyday fans from all walks of life, famous actors. You know, these are all people he's rubbed shoulders with over the years and has run events with as guests. So it makes for great listening because it's not just like what ties all the guests together is the fact that they are maybe fans of the club, but it's all about their lives, you know, delving into their background and that kind of thing.
I think it's a great. I think that for anyone that goes on to listen to that podcast, and I've seen it from the beginning, and I've seen you working on it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great example of somebody that has taken, I suppose, what is a niche market. I mean, it's particular. It's for fans of Celtic Football Club, but it has become so much more, and it has become, and it's a perfect use of a podcast. So that Andrew has a fanzine. He has a lot of content through that, but now it's all gone into a podcast format, which is opened up a whole new way of reaching the fans and keeping people feel very connected, don't they? Because they're listening to people's voices and listening to their stories, and he's getting great feedback.
And the beauty of a podcast is that people tend to open up, you know, a lot more. Like he just called it the Celtic Soul. He asked them to open up their Celtic soul and tell, like, he gets these great interviews out of people, and it's not something he just started this summer. It's something that he's built up over 20 years. Is this ability to interview people and get the best out of them, and it's a skill in itself, you know.
I just think it's a great example of somebody who's new, but you were saying it started, and is a worry for me actually, is that the market is saturated, that there's so many podcasts and there's so many people doing it. I was even thinking, is it too late to be coming in now at this stage to try and launch a podcast? But look at Andrew and look at the one you're working on. For me, 20,000 is amazing. Like, just to have, and I know if he doesn't put it up on time, he's getting texts, isn't he? Going, where's the podcast? Like, there people are waiting for the
Friday
content.
4:45.
He's twice a week.
He's bi-weekly, so Tuesdays and Fridays. So there's a bit of work involved in getting it out, but it's like anything. We're on episode 30 now, and it's a relatively smooth kind of production process now to get it from from start to finish. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, look, why don't we start? We have a slideshow, which you have been working hard on, but it gives us talking points for each of the what kind of want to go through. I put a little bit of slides in that it's aimed at, because I know there's a lot of writers who are online. I wanted to kind of point to that as well. So we'll go through that. But we're going to go through the basics. I'm going to go through totally starting from scratch now. You've just the idea of a podcast. Maybe you have an idea of what it's going to be, or maybe you just want to do one, you're not sure what it's going to be. So maybe we'll kick off, Ronan, with the first slide there. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just looking at some of the questions coming in there. So we will do a bit of a Q&A at the end, and I will get through all of those, you know. Just straight off the bat, like I'm seeing a question there about how long it takes to produce a podcast. Like it just depends on the podcast, its content, where you're gathering your content from, you know, how handy you are at the technical side of things as well.
Well, luckily,
we'll get to that.
We'll get to the questions at the end. So I just want to kind of go through it, because we're going to talk about everything, and I'll be able to go back at the end. I always go back through the questions. So please put your questions up, and Ronan, I'll go through those at the end. So the first one, which is one I put in, was why am I setting it up and what is it about? And I think you have to ask yourself that question, because it's a huge commitment, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people are seeing the lockdown as an opportunity to maybe reach out to a new audience, you know, to try and reach that new audience purely from a market point of view. If you're trying to sell something, you know, who's your audience? And podcasting is just kind of that new medium that allows you to do that, you know, in a kind of a non-intrusive format. You know, people tend to listen to them on the commute or whatever. So you can kind of multitask when you're listening to a podcast, you know. But definitely. Sorry.
Just go on to the next slide, because that's what we're talking about, isn't it? On the next slide.
Yes. Oh, yes. Here we go.
Why start a podcast?
Yeah, just building it, as you can read there, build a genuine connection with your audience. You know, I think people like to invest in people as well as a business or an idea. So a podcast is a great way to maybe put a voice behind that business. You know, it's a long format content, so people tend to kind of switch on a podcast and you know, stick with it from start to finish. It's fairly non-intrusive. A lot of them don't have any adverts. It's a convenient format. It's not like you have to look at your screen. You can put it on in the car while you're driving and concentrating and that kind of stuff. I put that at the bottom there. It's like starting a blog in 2004 because that's kind of where we're at, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, that's true. And it's a great way to, I think it's a great way to connect to a new audience as well. And like if we take somebody like a writer who is maybe writing in a certain genre, or a business person who is something that is quite niche, you can then expand it. You can take that niche, but expand it out to a wider audience. And it is a way of reaching you in a way. If you're a writer or you're a business person, it's a way of getting new sales, isn't it? Like
yeah.
it is a sales driver.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the you need to figure out what your end goal is. Like, what are you trying to get out of your podcast? Is it, sales? Is it to drive business to, your website? Is it to sell merchandise? Is it, you know what I mean? Or it can be just for the crack,
Yeah, I think you have that in the next slide, I think, don't you?
I'm skipping ahead of myself here.
Oh,
Next
sorry.
slide is, I think we're looking at the kind of the different categories of
Oh,
podcasts. So this is kind of comedy, kind of tops the bill there, where people just want to tune in and be entertained, and that's perfectly fine. I've loads of comedy podcasts. I listen to Jim Jeffries, the Two Johnnies, stuff like that. That's kind of just, it's just a bit of crack, and it's nice to kind of switch off and unwind with those kind of podcasts. They prove to be the most popular. News.
really, yeah, the comedy.
News, not that familiar with any news ones, but maybe kind of current affairs. I mean,
I know. There's one that you listen to is
David McWilliams podcast.
yeah,
It's
his is
fantastic.
brilliant, isn't it?
And it makes economics kind of very, what's the word? Very kind of accessible to people,
Yeah.
True crime. You're into your true crime.
Yeah, I do like my true crime. Serial is one of the most famous, I think, true crime podcasts. That was out a number of years ago, and it's it just hooks you in. It's a bit like watching the documentaries, like the Staircase, one that we watched on Netflix. It's a bit like that in a podcast, and you're just dying to see what's going on and what's happened, and they hook you in. And it's I know. There's a huge amount of true crime podcasts out there. Now, there is some, and I know this is what we want to talk about as well, is what can turn you off a podcast, and what hooks you in and what can turn you off. And I downloaded a true crime podcast recently, and I only got about 15 minutes in because they started recreating a scene. Like they were trying to recreate a murder with sound effects and things, and I was just absolutely turned off. So maybe we'll talk about that as well in a little while. But
It's more like a radio drama or something.
Yeah, like you can get it can be okay. Everybody's everything's not going to appeal to everybody, but I just thought that was an interesting thing they'd done that really turned me off. The type of true crime ones that I love are the ones that you are just hooked and you just can't wait to see. You're left kind of waiting for more.
Yeah, I think I have some here on the next slide you wanted to talk about.
If we just go back maybe to the because I can go through because they're the formats. So if you just go back to the genres, history, I listen to a huge amount of history, and that's probably because I write historical fiction. But it's a great way, I think, of immersing yourself in history, a podcast, because you can have interviews or you can take out interesting lectures and make it interesting. So that'd be the majority of what I would listen to.
Yeah, a lot of people listen to podcasts as well to be educated, I find myself a lot of the time when I'm studying as well, listen to kind of science and kind of technological podcasts. There's podcasts about podcasts. There's podcasts about the microphones. There's podcasts about everything. There's some of them I just dip in and out of, I maybe wouldn't subscribe to them. Maybe it's just because of the particular content of that particular podcast. I listen to it. But you're right. Yeah, there is things that will turn you off very quickly of a podcast, especially as we were talking earlier about the saturated market. A lot of people started podcasts during lockdown, and I remember reading a tweet right back at the start saying if you want just an idea of how many podcasts are out there, since the start of lockdown, Amazon are sold out of podcasting equipment. So everyone was kind of giving it a go. Some took off, some didn't. A lot of comedians, I listened to a couple of well-known comedians who started podcasts, and they just weren't very good. purely because
It just wasn't funny, was it not?
no, the content is great, but just the fundamental basics of recording it were just not there. There were noisy
So,
environments. There was too many distractions. You could hear doors banging. The line would keep breaking up. And I know technology lets us down at the best of times, but
yeah.
you know, just Zoom interviews that just broke up and no effort was made to
So the
maybe
production.
yeah
Well, we
to
can
edit
look at
them out.
that. Yeah, we can look at that as the do's and don'ts, because I think that's probably what's going to come in and out is what makes a good podcast. Continuing with the genres, then sports is obviously one that you're working on, and it is a pure example of it being able to absorb content of the team that you follow, or I mean, look at all the sports shows that are across radio, like Off the Ball, and that. I presume there's a lot of sports podcasts out there as well.
A lot of sports podcasts out there. If there's a football club that's worth talking about, there's a podcast about it. I know something like Liverpool have an incredible team of people who work on the podcast, but also they work on visual content for their stuff as well. So yeah, sports is huge. Like even I know Joe Rogan's not specifically sports, but it's like he's after doing a multi-million-dollar deal with Spotify for exclusive rights for his podcast.
Okay.
You know,
And Second Captains, that's a big sports
Second
one as well, I
Captains
think,
is a
isn't it?
fantastic one, and they've a brilliant team of people working on it. And they don't just do the Second Captains. There are other podcasts they're working on. I think you've one of them here. You're going to talk about one of the documentary ones they're involved in.
Yeah.
That they kind of they have a podcast, a team of people who are there to work on it, and you can spot these podcasts because they're just so well produced. Even the marketing material around them and the promotional material on Instagram and Spotify or on Facebook and Twitter and that, you know, it's fantastic. They have a whole marketing team there as well to push it out, you know. So there is ways of kind of, and they started off from humble beginnings as well. It's just, you know, a small team with an idea who've grown to that size, you know.
It'd be great. Imagine getting to that stage would be great. Then the last few is business, arts, science, health and fitness, religion and spirituality. So really anything that you can think of, there's going to be a podcast out there, isn't there?
Absolutely. And then within all of them, you're going to have your subgenres as well. So yeah.
So I suppose if you're
thinking,
if you're thinking of setting one up, you have to decide where it's going to be placed, and it is quite like writing a book again, which is, are you writing crime? Are you writing historical fiction? Is it non-fiction? You really need to decide. You don't want to go in with just going, oh, I have all these ideas, I'm not sure. You really should be looking at the genre, because it's going to be placed in a category and pushed out to people in a category, isn't it? So that's the first thing, is decide the category that you're going to be working on.
I think if you've clear guidelines on what your podcast is going to be, which we'll kind of get to now in a minute, I suppose, you know, because when it comes to like, you don't just throw your podcast up online. There's a lot of metadata that has to be, you know, filled out before it gets anywhere near the platform, Spotify or wherever it's going to go. So, you know, you have to bear that in mind as well, that you need to kind of, metadata is the key to getting it out there as well once it's done. So even when it's recorded, there's still work to be done.
So the metadata would feed into your genre, really, wouldn't it?
Exactly.
I put this slide in earlier just about the formats, because it's the title of the webinar. So you want to write a podcast, and obviously I know you don't particularly write a podcast. There's lots more to it, but the formats that I would see, and I had kind of identified 4 main formats, and I know that's different, and some of them might even be a mix-up of these formats. But the first one I was thinking of written-wise is the scripted podcast. And one of the best examples I could think of that was the Irish History podcast by Finn Dwyer. It's an excellent podcast if anyone has any interest in history at all. It's just superb, and I think I was trying to work out why. I think there's 2 things. One is his communication, like the way he's literally reading. He writes it and he reads it. You can tell that he's reading it. But it's done in such a way. He's a lovely voice as well. I think voice is so important when you're listening to people.
Absolutely.
But he's making what can often be complicated content very, very simple and able to understand. And I was just going to say that earlier about podcasts. It's like going to a lecture or anything, or you can read material and it goes in, but when somebody speaks it to you or discusses it, it's just such a different learning experience, isn't it? Like that.
Yeah, it's easier to absorb. Nearly,
your brain works different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's easier to absorb, and then, as I said before, it's a format that you can do while multitasking, and sometimes it's just easier to be walking on the beach instead of staring at a screen to kind of the environment that you listen to your podcasts in helped you to absorb them as well,
Yeah, and it's a bit like a chat, I suppose, with somebody as well. Like if you have a conversation with somebody and they tell you something, you remember it. And like, whereas we're reading a lot of content all the time, so that's why I really like to explore the podcast. So scripted is definitely one. It means you full control over it. You know what you're saying. You can also time it. So for anyone that's intending on doing a scripted podcast where it's just perhaps yourself reading the content, first of all, you don't want it to sound like you're just reading it. It should be very interesting to the ear. But if you are doing it that way, what I'd say is something we learned in journalism school, which is you speak 3 words a second. So in a minute, you tend to have 180 words. So if you're aiming for your podcast to be 20 minutes, you can work it out that way, or half an hour. So that's just one little tip I'd say if you're going to script your podcast, is that's how many words you would need. I'd imagine for a scripted podcast, they tend to be on the shorter side.
Yeah, there's a particular scripted one I listen to, but it's I think I was telling you about it one day. It was all about the da-dum at the start of Netflix, the Netflix sound icons.
Yeah.
And it's actually the sound of the sound designer banging his wedding ring off the locker in his house. Ba-bam, that tap sound. And then he developed you were asking earlier about what sound design is. That sound design, taking that idea and adding, layers and effects and some kind of little music incidences along with it to create an audio ident that's so recognizable now when you hear it, But that particular podcast is completely scripted, with interviews with people who talk about the industry and that kind of stuff as well.
What's the name of it? What did you say the name was?
It's called 20,000Hertz.
Okay.
So it kind of delves into little, like they did a podcast recently all about Baby Shark, where the song Baby Shark came from. It originated in Germany back in the 50s, this kind of stuff. And then it eventually got sung in like in the US at summer camps and stuff like that. And eventually it became the massive hit that it is now, that all kids wreck our heads to listen to.
So you're going to pick up really random kind of material, but you're going to remember that,
But they're always about 30 minutes long.
Yeah, I think that I know the Irish history. I think it's only, it's about 30 minutes, or when I listened to last night, it was only 20 minutes. So the scripted, now you can be scripted and have interviews as well, which my next one is the interview, but I think the scripted, that's getting into more documentary style. So that's just a pure scripted podcast, which it just means you have full control over it. You know the length of it, and but I think the work there is going into the research and the writing of it, which is, it's almost like writing a blog or writing something that you're going to put out there. And the second one I was saying, or identifying, was the interview. And I would be very familiar with this. I think we all listen to interviews in podcasts over and over. I've given the example of How to Fail podcast with Elizabeth Day. It's a very well-known podcast. I think it's award-winning. And she takes a person every podcast and she interviews them in a particular format. But what's interesting is that you just learn things about people that you don't know. That might be familiar to you. They're usually famous people. So it's definitely a way of getting content. I think if you have guests, and with like the Celtic Soul as well, you take a person and you interview them and everybody's interested. We're all our own little Ray Darcy's, or like feel like you're almost on a show. But it's a great way of for people, if it's on a certain subject, of people getting to know you as the host and you and the guest, but getting information that way as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Even when I'm editing some of the podcasts, the audio file will come in and it's an hour long, and I'm going, we have to edit this down now, and I'm just engrossed in the conversation, because as you said, everyone has a story to tell. Some just are more entertaining than others,
And I think as well, in the environment and the way that we live nowadays, it's just so interesting to hear people speak and talk and have a conversation, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like it's, we do a lot of reading and we do a lot of our connecting through emails and texts, but so to hear the voices and listen to people and listen to different accents and that as well can be nice. So that's the interview. The next one I was identifying was the self-reflection, which I'm saying blind boy. I also kind of see that almost as a stream of consciousness. So it's somebody coming on to speak, and they don't necessarily, it's not scripted. Now I know he works, and I know he has he has researched, he doesn't just come on and speak about nothing, even though it almost sounds like he is. I'd imagine that's one of the harder ones to do.
I'd imagine so. I mean, you'd want to be fairly confident in whatever you're talking about, and also be very comfortable creating that environment or space where you're just talking to yourself,
Yeah.
It's it's got to be a little strange. Like you sometimes wonder about Blind Boy, but he does an enormous amount of research. He's a very very clever guy. But there's a lot of elements of Blind Boy's podcast as well that help create, as he calls, the podcast hug, which is that nice warm environment, a really nice sound, nice background piano music playing. And you actually feel like you know him, just from listening to the podcast. We actually went to see him. We were at one of his live podcasts with David McWilliams back October 2 years ago.
But that
The live
I
setup,
was just going to say that just shows like we were fans of his podcast. We listened to it regularly, and then he had a live show. And we're like, oh my God, we got tickets to go to see the live show and watch the podcast. So he's totally crossed over into like a live event.
We also ended up backstage as well. We went to meet him backstage.
I asked a stupid question, and he said he invited us backstage, and we literally ran up. I couldn't believe it, and I was absolutely starstruck speaking to this man with a bag on his head. But it was just because I was such a fan, and I felt like I was meeting somebody I looked up to. So he's an enigma, I think, really. But you're right. I think about the podcast hug. You tune in because you want to listen to that voice, and you want to listen to what they have to say, and you, as well as learning a lot about what he says, it's a comfort, isn't it? It's like calling a friend. It's like listening to a friend on the
someone
phone,
you trust as well. If he says it, you kind of believe him. So
I think that's very interesting for people that are maybe in business, or I keep referring to authors because that's what I am. But it's definitely a way of maintaining an audience. Like say you're an author and you've only a book out every year. If you're running a podcast and you're speaking weekly, or how often, you're bringing all those people with you all the time, aren't you? Like they're still interested in what you're doing. So it's definitely, I think, a way of, if you're confident enough in that format, if you have a lot to say, I would just say that you need a certain personality, I think, and a certain maybe voice and production. You're right about the production in Blind Boy. That is not just being thrown up there. Well, he's a sound expert himself, isn't he? That's his background. It's a recording.
Yeah, he's a musician as well. He's recorded all the band stuff as well over the years, so he kind of has a good ear for it, I was actually surprised when he mentioned one day that, I think he mentioned the software he uses, and I was kind of going, I haven't heard of anyone using that software in years for recording, because he'd be old school kind of. He's and I can't remember what it was, but the software he mentioned he was using is a free software. So that's a prime example of like you don't have to pay big money to get to that kind of level, as long as you know what you're doing.
We have information on all the software and all the tech stuff just at the end there as well. So the final style that I was identifying, and I know there's more, I'm not just saying this is all, but it's the documentary style. And the sample I'm giving is Where's George Gibney? That's a new podcast that's out. It's only up about 4 weeks. It's released weekly. It's the BBC and it's Second Captains. And it's excellent. It's an investigative type series into George Gibney, who was a swimmer, who was a swimming coach who abused children in Ireland. So you're tuning into that because you're learning, like that happened back in the 90s when I was young. I didn't know. So I'm learning now about that. And that's like almost a true crime style. But I think documentary style suits that type of news, investigative genre, but it can be used across any, like I was thinking if I do set up one, I'm probably going to go along my novels and the investigation I've done. It's scripted, and it's also interviews, and it can be music, and it's kind of like a radio documentary, I think.
Yeah, I haven't seen this one now, but you told me about it. It sounds fantastic,
Yeah.
And a lot of people are talking about it. I think it's charting really well at the moment in the UK and Ireland.
Yeah, because my friend is interviewed in it, and that's how I know about it, first of all. But she sent it to me today. It's number 8 in the British podcasting charts. So you can see, but now they have a big team and everything behind it. But it's when you get when you do it really well and you have a good story, I think documentary style is a really good way of going as well. So
yeah, again, all of this boils down to good content. If you have something to talk about and something that you can talk about, passionately or comfortably, you can create some fantastic content for podcasts, and you can understand then why it's so popular and it's doing so well in the charts.
Yeah, and I think if you feel you have something interesting to say, then don't be afraid to say it, because it's we're all the time looking for new podcasts, because we have so much time in our lives to listen to it, I'm at a loose end all of the time. Do you want to hit the next slide there?
Yeah, I pulled up some stats just to kind of give an idea of the amount of podcasts out there. And even though podcasting is relatively new, it is growing very, very fast. So at the WWDC, which is Apple's Worldwide Web Development Conference in 2018, they confirmed that there was over 550,000 podcasts, but as of September now, there's over 1 million. So
Oh my
and then
God.
just depending on how many podcasts there is, then obviously you've all those episodes that continue and run. You've 30 million episodes as of April this year, so it's probably up near 40 million at this stage.
Oh my God, they're crazy numbers, aren't they?
It's a massive amount of content. So understandably, Apple and Spotify and a lot of the podcast hosts, they're kind of clamping down a little bit to try and help the good stuff rise. So it is a competitive market out there.
Yeah, you mean clamping down as in they're having filters, really, isn't it? As in they're only kind of accepting well-produced content now.
You've got certain criteria you got to meet before you just. No, you can still put your podcast up, but it just might make it onto Apple, or it might make it to Spotify.
I think it's a little bit like the self-publishing marketplace, which had a peak, I think, a couple of years ago, and then there's only, I suppose, certain type of writers were getting their self-published books up there. Then there, I think, came a really big influx, and it became a much more competitive place. And it's like that, the best rise to the top. And I don't think there's filters. I don't think Amazon are that filter. You can just still publish anything you want. It doesn't have to be edited or anything like that. So it's interesting to see that Apple the hosts are putting filters in.
Just to put it,
it's not like that.
Just to put it in context, like Spotify, there's 40,000 songs a day uploaded to Spotify. So it's the same kind of market where it gets saturated with content all the time. But again, the good stuff will rise to the top. That's important.
Okay.
So if your podcast is good, it'll do well.
So aim to be good. Okay, from the very start. Okay, what's up next?
What's up next is just kind of a breakdown of the age demographics. This is kind of if you're trying to figure out who your audience is. Are you going to go for that 18 to 24-year-old market? Is your audience? Are you going to go for the really tough market at the over 65s? And the interesting thing about the older generation is that during lockdown, they've been talking a lot more about podcasts. So even, for example, my dad, who's in his 60s, was asking me about the podcast I was working on. I was telling him that the guest that week was the next Irish international footballer. And he's like, how do I listen to that? And I said, well, you've got an Apple phone. Your phone's an Apple phone. The podcasting application is built into the phone. So you just click in there, search for it, and it'll come up. And then the next day he rang me to say that he was after listening to it. He thought it was great. So there's still a market there to be tapped into, the older generations that they just need a little bit of guidance, but they're starting to tap into the podcast thing now as well.
Yeah, so predominantly you're really looking, the majority is under 44, say. But the only thing is, it's a relatively new marketplace, and as we all get older, it'll become just so familiar to us. And with lockdown, I think a lot of people were, particularly people who never did a Zoom or never did online stuff, have gone over online or whatever. So I think it's all growing.
Yeah, I've just seen a comment come in there about children's podcast. That's actually something I haven't even looked at, It's interesting.
Yeah, no, I'm not familiar with any. I know for driving in the car with the kids, I'd be putting on stories and things. So
so it's definitely a market there. That's interesting.
Yeah, definitely. There's the job for you now, Ronan.
Yeah, like I haven't enough to be doing. So here's some more stats I just pulled. You can have a read through them there. 60% listen to podcasts to educate themselves. 81% podcast streams happen at the weekend. 25% during weekdays. Sorry, 25% during the commute times. 77% on mobile devices, and 2 out of 3 podcast listeners say the shows get their full attention. So there you go.
You said we were talking about this last night, and you said to me, what do you think the stats are since lockdown? And I said, well, commutes are down. People are not, they're not on the trains. They're not walking as much to work. They have to be down. And what did you tell me the stats were?
I pulled the stats for March into April. Globally, podcasts were up 43%. So there you go.
That's nuts, isn't it? So it's not what you think at all. So that just shows you that it's growing, and I think it's great. Okay.
So I'll kind of fly through these because pre-production. This is now getting your head into what your podcast is going to be about. These are the kind of important things to look at. On the right there, you see that I've kind of broken down some of the podcasts and the kind of the timing on them. So like if you're doing it every day, 1 to 5 minutes is usually kind of an update. A lot of the sports clubs would have that kind of approach, or semi-daily where they do it in the morning, maybe in the afternoon. Then daily, 15 minutes, sometimes up to 30 minutes. If you've something
So
interesting
people
to
do
talk
daily
about.
podcasts, do they?
Yeah, a lot of
That sounds
sports
crazy.
companies. Yeah, a lot of sports will do that kind of thing,
Hmm.
Weekly's kind of the one that most people go for, uh, which is up to 60 minutes. But again, a lot of the weekly ones I hear are, an hour and a half, or an hour and 20. Bi-weekly, 30 to 60 minutes is kind of good. There's a couple of them I listen to as well. 30 minutes, they hit the 30-minute mark and they're out of there. That's it.
Yeah.
Monthly, 60 to 90 minutes. But I mean, after monthly, you're not really podcasting. If you're doing one every 6 months, like, it's not really podcasting. You're just
Yeah.
you're just having a
And
conversation with yourself.
I think it can be annoying if you subscribe or you listen to somebody and they might have 6 episodes up and you're really enjoying it, and then there's just a massive gap. So
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I would say, and one of the reasons I actually haven't started a podcast yet, or because I was considering it at the start of lockdown, like everybody else, is the commitment. And I just said I cannot commit to this at the moment, and
Yeah.
it's a big commitment. And I think if you're going to go ahead and do it properly, then you have to give yourself all those hours in the week or the month at the time, and because it is a time commitment. Let's be honest, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it is. You really do have to commit to it. You have to, if you have a co-host as well, they have to commit to it. And it's not just the kind of the research, it's the recording and the editing as well, which, the more you do, the quicker you get at it, obviously.
Yeah.
But it is kind of something you need to think about. You know, but there was something I was going to say there. Yeah, there's like doing your podcast in a series is a good approach as well. Like, say you have 6 or 12 podcasts you want to put out because you've got the content to do it, and then take a break. Or there's an Irish music industry podcast. Mark Graham, I think is his name. He's actually a musician himself with King Kong Company. His podcast is kind of, it runs for a couple of months and then he takes a break and he researches and he gathers his interviews and he gets ready to go again for the next season. So there is a lot of seasonal podcasts out there as well.
Okay, that's good. Amy's asking, is bi-weekly, twice a week or every fortnight? Oh, we had this exact conversation last night. Twice a week we're saying. Yeah. Because otherwise it'd be bi-monthly, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, bi-monthly, I think. Yeah. So I think maybe I worded that wrong. But yeah, so, and then you got to figure out, are you doing your podcast solo? Have you a co-host? Is it going to be a group thing? Is it going to be more than 2 years? Those kind of things. But yeah, definitely.
Group chats can work well, can't they? Because it's just like tuning into your friends. It's like just checking in with your friends, having the crack.
Yeah,
can't they?
Yeah. There's some of them are like that. I've listened to a couple like that, and they are very entertaining. I don't know if I don't know if I do it with any of my friends, but but yeah, no, it's definitely but as long as everyone's on the same page and there is a kind of a format structure or something, which I think we look at now down the line here. So,
okay.
So yeah, so the next slide is about developing your concept. So, like, what do you need to do to generate leads for is it to generate leads for your business, or have you booked to promote, or are you trying to sell merchandise or something like that? These are the kind of things you need to figure out, right? What is the end game here? Why am I starting a podcast? Am I trying to drive traffic to my website? Do I have an upcoming book? Have I got a training course coming up or something like that? Or do you want people to get involved, So yeah, do you want to be recognized as a leader in your genre? Are you a specialist in a particular area? Do you know something that, you think will help other people and you think they'd be interested in hearing? So kind of looking into those kind of things. Have you a particular message, as we saw earlier on the different types of podcasts out there? There are spiritual and religion podcasts out there. Are you a person of faith who has, an important message you want to get out there and there's an audience for that? Have you something you really believe in or express yourself, that kind of stuff? Or do you just want to do it for the crack?
I think a lot of people just want to do it for the crack.
Yeah.
I know it's an achievement, isn't it? It's almost like producing a book or something. It's content that is up there, it's out there, and it's yours, and you have full control over it.
But the other side of it as well is that, I wouldn't go straight into doing a podcast. I would do kind of like a test, like a recording test to see, does it work well? Listen back to it, kind of get critical. If you're just doing it for the crack and it's you and one of your mates, you realistically have to ask yourself, am I funny? Are we funny? Are we entertaining? Is there something here that people are going to buy into?
Like the Two Johnnies is a good example, I think, of that. I mean, if anyone knows that podcast, it's one of the most popular, I think, in Ireland.
Oh, it's massive.
That started off with two lads just chatting, really, isn't that?
Yeah.
It's a conversational type.
They
now have a TV series.
They started off doing sketches on Facebook and stuff like that, and they kind of, if anyone asks me, I describe them as like the new Dunbelievables for a younger generation, that they're just these two comic guys, and they're genuinely funny. They'll sit there and have a conversation, and they'll just knock good crack out of it, and they have a massive listenership among younger people. So probably the 18 to 24 group is probably their biggest audience, And yeah, as you said, they've a new TV show out now, so the lads are doing brilliant for themselves, purely on the back of the podcast.
Yeah, it's great. I love to see all that, So, okay, what's up next?
So up next is, I don't know. I've no previews. Yeah, picking a theme or topic. It can be anything about pop culture or ping pong balls, whatever you want to talk about on your podcast. But just as long as you can speak at length and be passionate about that particular subject, then absolutely go for it, But just bear in mind that if you're committing to doing a podcast long term, does your subject have longevity? Can you talk about it at length for 100 plus episodes? Do you think it could go that long? And be genuinely be excited so that you can make the discussion, entertaining and engaging for your audience.
So if you're starting, say you're going to decide you're going to do one, would you really need to think that you have content for 100, or should you be aiming for 6 or 12 and seeing where it goes? Or what, like if you're really starting out, and also you're saying testing it, because obviously you might, the first few, you might adapt it after that. What would you say is a good number to have maybe prepped from day zero?
If you think of it like the TV industry or the movie industry, or well, specifically TV, where there's no TV show that just goes, makes a 6-part series and goes out there and releases it. They all make a pilot, and the pilot's tested. It's put in front of, an audience who rates it and grades it and gives feedback. And then maybe they don't like a great example of this is what's the Manchester-based comedy one? With the Gallaghers. Shameless went to test with the first 4 episodes, and the audience didn't like the character playing Frank Gallagher, and the whole first 4 episodes had to be reshot again with the guy who we know now as Frank Gallagher. So, there's no harm. Again, you can be your own critic, but play it for somebody else, somebody you trust, somebody you know who will be honest with you, and get the feedback, take it on board, go right, where can we improve? And when you're happy with it and when you're ready to release it, then go for it,
And would you say to have, say, 6 ready or 12 ready? Like what number wise, what do you need to pre-prepare?
I'd say something around 6. I mean, try 1 and see if you like it, Are you comfortable speaking into a microphone or doing an interview? Are you out of your comfort zone? If you're out of your comfort zone and it's scaring you to death, you're going to have to work on that. There's just ways and means of working on that, but give it a go. I can't say that enough.
But you're saying, but don't release. So do a test one, but don't release it. Is that what you mean?
Do a test one and see how it sits with you. If you're happy with it, then by all means go ahead, release it. And but as I said, be prepared for longevity. If it's something that you really think that you're going to go ahead and do for a long period of time, then my advice is try 6, see how you go.
Yeah.
And
I suppose you'd need to look at also it depends on what you're talking about. If it's stuff that's not newsworthy, then you can, it's good, it has longevity. But say you're doing news topics or something in the media, I'd probably say do 3. And then if it's done on current affairs, because you'll obviously have to be keeping up with the news or whatever. It just depends on what you're doing, doesn't it?
Yeah, like any of the news ones are kind of going to age very, very quickly. So, if somebody listening back from your podcast from 6 months ago is going to be out of the loop. But the current affairs ones, that's probably why they're kept fairly short.
Yeah.
Especially if they're released daily. So do your research as well. What's your competition? Who's out there? Who's doing what? Who's doing what? What part of their shows do you really, really like? Can I borrow that? their introduction
Steal.
themes. Yeah, but borrow, that kind of thing.
And also, you don't want to be copying anybody. You need to know what's out there so that yours is yours uniquely. It's not,
find your unique selling point.
off. Yeah.
Find the unique selling point, and I think that's so. Okay, I'm going to move on because we've a load of slides here. I didn't realize. You must have added in 20 this morning.
No, I did not. Because we don't have that much longer left, so let's just kind of zoom through the last.
Yeah, so just getting a name for your podcast, something catchy, something memorable. One of the podcasts I listen to is called "I'm Okay, You're Okay, I'm Not Okay, You're Not Okay," and they have an absolute nightmare trying to create the acronym for that and tell people what it is and getting their handle for Spotify or for Instagram and everything else like that. So they instantly regret calling their podcast that. So keep it kind of snappy. Put your name in the title. If it's DIY, call it something DIY with Nicola Cassidy. That kind of thing.
Simple.
Yeah,
and you know what it is. Yeah.
But if there's something in particular you talk about that nobody else talks about, like say UX design or syntax or something, got to do with coding or, use that in the title, because if somebody's specifically looking for that kind of thing, use syntax in the title, but maybe use syntax program languages with Barry Gibb or whatever. Do you know what I mean?
Okay.
You don't really have to bother with putting the word podcast into your podcast, because then it shows up as there's something podcast, if you know what I mean.
Okay,
so don't even worry about that. So that's kind of just a little bit of advice there. I have a little link there at the bottom of that as well. I will put it together, a kind of a help sheet for everybody, but they're the kind of things that Apple will look for when you go to upload your podcast. There's a list of kind of things that you to look over,
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let's keep going, because I want to get onto the equipment, and because that's what
format your show. This is a basic format. This is what we use with the Celtic Soul podcast. So you have your intro music. Then Andrew welcomes everybody to the show. Talks about who's coming up on later on in the show in the interview. Talks about mentions the sponsor, and then he'll have a little chat about what's going on that particular day or week at the football club. If there's any news about maybe signings or any of that kind of stuff. And then we go into the interview, and that could last for anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour, just depending on how well the interview's going. And then afterwards, thank the guest, call to action, please review us, hit the subscribe button so you won't miss any episodes, that kind of thing. Visit the website, because the end game with the Celtic Soul podcast is merchandise right now, because he's loads of original merchandise got to do with the club, and so the trick is to drive the traffic there to try and get them to purchase something.
So have a format and kind of stick to it then weekly.
And then your outro music.
Easier.
Yeah, could join us again next Friday, and your outro music, and it's as simple as that.
It sounds professional then as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
So your guests in your interviews, just draw up who your guest is going to be. Make sure they're ready to go when you're interviewing them. Obviously, people aren't sitting in a room together at the moment doing interviews. It's kind of hard to get that setup going. So a very easy way to do it is over Zoom or Skype or anything like that. Like, people are kind of accustomed to Zoom and Teams now.
Are they good enough quality, Ronan, like for sound?
Like the audio we have here today, like that's kind of what you're getting. It's not brilliant. And what I would recommend is there's a couple of applications. I think I mentioned them a little bit later on, but Zencaster is absolutely fantastic. It runs alongside, say, we're doing this interview here today, but Zencaster will record professional audio quality, depending on obviously your input and output, but it doesn't capture like a telephone sound, which is kind of what you end up with on Teams or Zoom or that kind of thing. So
that's an app you run, is it? How does that work?
It's like an online program, and you basically pay a little subscription. Actually, it's free right now. They've waived all subscriptions on Zencaster until the end of the year, with the current situation. So you basically send, like you've done with me to invite me to this chat today. You send a link to who you're interviewing, and a checklist comes up. It checks their mic, it checks their headphones, and it records my audio on its own and your audio on its own, and then it sends me both those files. So when I go to edit the show, I have two audio files instead of one, just mashed together.
It's a really good tip. Yeah, I
yeah,
hadn't
so
heard
that's
of that.
really
That's
cool.
great.
Yeah, and just be sure to
Great.
schedule your interview time, and make sure that you're there on time, and because obviously if you're trying to grab somebody and it's important, you don't really want to be wasting their time or them hanging around, that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
Um,
Headphones, do you mean while you're listening to it, or there? What do you mean by headphones? And mic, I think we're going
the
to.
headphones you have there are great because they have a little microphone that hangs just below your mouth. So the
You
Apple
mean
ones are great.
my
Yeah,
Apple? Yeah.
yeah, they're fantastic. And what they'll do as well is, because the microphone's close to the mouth, it's not going to record. If you're in a big room, it's not going to record that echoey reverb kind of sound like you're in a cathedral. It'll just record what's right in front of you. So even at the bare minimum, stick a pair of headphones in for your interview, and those ones are 100% ideal. Some of the best interviews I've heard, will do the job. So AirBuds. I see
Susie's.
Susie's just mentioned
Yeah,
AirBuds
Susie's
there.
in there.
I've actually no experience with AirBuds, but everyone seems to have like the normal kind of pod ones. Now you can go for a better setup, like these kind of headphones, Audio Technicas. They'll probably set you back about 150 quid, but I use these all the time for mixing and designing and composing and different things like that. So they're great kind of when you're on the go. Like the sound of these today is incredible. But I'm also using this microphone setup and everything else as well. So we'll have a little look at that now as well.
Okay.
So yes, here we go. Equipment. This is just something for anyone who's starting off. This is absolutely brilliant. This is a starter pack, and it's got everything. You have your microphone. You've got a little user audio interface that plugs into the computer. Your microphone goes into the interface. The interface goes into the computer. You have your headphones that go into the interface. But this one here in particular comes with a lovely little bit of software called Studio One, and again, there's loads of free softwares out there, so don't be going spending a lot of money on it. You really don't. If you have an Apple computer, they all come with GarageBand. I'd say about 70% of all podcasts are recorded on GarageBand. You don't have to go spending big money on it. This little pack here, they actually do them if you're from the northeast. The Sound Shop do them, but they ship to all over Ireland, and it's €205, and you have everything you need there to get you up and running, to get your podcast going.
That's a great little pack, isn't it?
Just asking here about the Zoom H5 instead of the microphone. The H5 is actually a lovely piece of kit, but it will depend on your environment. If you're in a nice, quiet environment, then you can place that in front of you. It will record the person you're talking to. It'll capture it nice, but it'll only be on one audio file. So, I wouldn't be mad against it. I'm not sure if the H5 is the one you can plug a microphone into. I saw a photograph there last week. Darren Garrity was doing her podcast, and she was using one of the Zoom recorders, and she'd plugged a microphone into it, and she was just holding it up to the person while she was interviewing them. The H6, that's the one. Thank you, Susie. So again, €205. That there, I can't recommend that enough. The Sound Shop do them, so that's pretty cool.
Sorry to interrupt, but it might be a stupid question. You see the box you're calling interface. What does that do? What is that for? Just cleaning the sound?
So
like,
that is, like you see on the left-hand side of it there, there's two inputs. So you can actually plug two microphones in simultaneously. So if you're sitting down interviewing somebody, you plug your two microphones into that, one pointed towards you, one pointed towards me, and and then on the software, you set up two audio tracks, one for you, one for me. And when you hit the record button, it'll record both of us simultaneously. So that plugs into your computer.
Recorder, is it?
No, that's just a way of getting the microphone plugged into your computer.
Okay.
Now you can bypass all of that kind of stuff if you there's a lot of microphones out there that are USB microphones. They literally plug straight into your computer, straight into the port at the side of your computer, and away you go. They have a volume on them and all. Something like the Blue Yeti, they're quite popular. But the only thing is,
need a Mac?
Sorry, go ahead.
Do you need a Mac? Can you do it on a PC?
Of course you can. I mentioned Macs there because GarageBand comes free with them. If you don't have a Mac, Audacity is a lovely piece of software. It's free. A lovely piece of software I use a lot myself is a program called Reaper. And Reaper it's free. You can buy a license for it. And if you're intending to kind of use it and go forward using it, I would buy a license for it. It's only about $60, but it's free to use for whatever you want. And any of these softwares, this is kind of the part where people get a little bit nervous or a little bit kind of scared off doing their podcast. I'm working in audio 20 years, and it's never, ever been easier to start recording. It's so simple to set up. I literally have this microphone here. I have a soundboard here beside me. It's a bit fancy looking, but it's doing exactly the same thing as that blue box. It's plugged into the computer. I have my headphones coming out of the computer, and off I go. I have my software. I launch it. I hit record. We're off to the races.
Right. Okay.
And honestly, if you sit down with your software and give yourself a day, maybe 2 days, you're fine. You'll figure it out very quick, because you really just need the basics. You do not have to go down any rabbit holes of, compression or EQ or any of that kind of stuff. You could just, if you get the fundamental basics of your audio right, and then you're laughing, your audio is going to be really good.
Okay, let's keep going, because it's 5 to 3. So I know we've a good few slides to the left. I just want to talk about the hosting and that as well.
Yeah, recording.
So,
if you're home recording, find yourself a quiet space, somewhere with soft furnishings. Don't go into a big empty room. A big empty room is going to be echoey. A room with a lot of glass is going to bend. The audio is going to reflect off the glass, and it's going to kind of muffle your sound. So, just think of those things. Like bookcases are great for trapping sound. If you have a bookcase set up in front of a bookcase, it'll stop that audio bouncing around the room.
that's why everybody was in front of bookcases during lockdown.
Yeah. Nothing to do with showing off their book collection and how intelligent they are.
Okay.
So yeah, use headphones, because when you're talking, when it's like when somebody's listening to something, some music or something, and you say something to them, they're like, "What?" And they shout. They've no idea about controlling the volume. But if you use headphones, you can really hear what your audience is going to hear when you're recording with a microphone. So get in nice and close, and you'll get those deep tones of your voice, and create your own little podcast hug.
Right. Okay.
As I said, ask your guests to use headphones as well, and then create a template in your audio software, so that every time you go to record, you're using the same template. Your intro music is already there. Your outro music is already there. Your interview plonks into the middle, and whatever you need to record. And if you're using transition sounds, little kind of sound bites that just move you from one audio bit to the next, or one piece of your interview to the next, So.
Okay.
Next up, music and sound effects. Music is kind of important for your podcast, because it's kind of the first thing people hear when they hit play. So you want to give them something that maybe represents your music or whatever. Is everything all right there? I just heard a blip.
Yeah.
Sorry. It's you want to hear something that's going to kind of welcome them to the podcast, So have a look online. There's royalty-free music, stock music. Most of them you probably end up paying about 200 quid. But if you're anyway good at making your own little music, like the two Johnnies have made their own little intro, this little song they play along with a banjo. It's a bit of crack, but once you hear that's their podcast. So if there's a band you're a fan of, and this is kind of a cool approach, there's a lot of musicians struggling out there right now. So maybe throw them a few quid and say, that song I really like of yours that you released last year on Spotify. Have an instrumental version of it. Chances are they have an instrumental version of it. If they don't, and you like the lyrics of it, and it's something to do with your podcast, throw them a few quid and ask them, can you use it? And then, mention them in your
yeah, that's a good idea.
Free set. There is free music online. Just go to YouTube, search for free music. They'll ask you to maybe credit their music on it. And all that's brilliant. And don't be afraid to use that and do that. But just remember that because it's free, thousands of people are going to use it. So, if you really want to make your podcast stand out, try and find something a little unique. Or you could hire me. I could do up a little kind of an audio pack. I did one last week for a friend for his podcast. I did a new intro theme, but I also gave him the music without the drums. I gave him all the layers on their own, so that when maybe he's doing his introduction, there's no drums underneath it. So it's just the kind of the nice string parts, that kind of stuff. And I gave him a little pack of transition sounds, so little kind of zoom sounds when you're going from one part to the next, and so you can have a little chat with me if you have a budget and you want to do something like that. That's no problem at all. If you genuinely like anything, if you have a budget, or you really want to make your podcast, it's like anything. If you have a budget there, then maybe get something unique made for your particular podcast, and then that way you're not going to run into finding somebody else that has the same thing,
And it's RonanMcQuillan.com, isn't it? Because your music is up online can people hear it?
I've a music library there on my website on RonanMcQuillan.com, and you can go through the whole. You can check for search by moods, tags, genres, that kind of stuff. I think I have about 200 and something tracks up there. I haven't got all my music library up there, but it's a good starting point because people can go in and go, oh, do you know that track there? I like that one, but maybe I don't like this bit of it, and I can rejig it for them and you know, that kind of thing. So I have stuff here about your podcast artwork. Now, what I might do is I might just, because we're running out of time, I'll put these on a kind of a cheat sheet because you can have a kind of read of them. But these are the kind of things, if you put any of this in your artwork for your podcast, they're not going to post it, you know. They'll immediately flag it and that'll be it. You have a quick read of them there. But as I said, we're recording this anyway, so people can maybe watch it back.
Yeah.
And have a read through that because we really have a lot in here, you know. Yeah, editing your podcast. I think they're out of sync. Editing your podcast, just clean up your audio. If there's a part of your podcast where you're interviewing somebody remotely and maybe somebody's walked in the middle of it, then leave an audio note. Say, we're just going to cut this bit out. Somebody's walked in. I'm marking it here and we're going back to the interview now. And just talk to yourself. And then when you go to listen back to the audio, you can find that piece and rip it out. And then, you know, move out your audio or join it all back up again, you know. Remove gaps, no silence. You don't want, the worst thing you can have is silence. Same like with a radio show, you know, just any silent gaps, just close them up. And I have a little slide here about EQ and vocals, but again, I'll put these all on a cheat sheet in a PDF, and maybe you could put them up on your website, Nikki, so people.
Yeah, well, I don't think you should make the slides available because I know they're yours and you're looking at training as well. But
some of this stuff here,
we're going to have links on my website just of some of the things we're talking about.
Yeah, these are kind of good cheat sheets.
This will be available as a playback, so people can see this as a playback.
These are good cheat sheets.
That's so scary now.
Yeah, you see, this is the thing. They're not really scary. I put a chart up on the one before it, and that's your kind of your audio spectrum there. From, you know, it tells you what to roll off and where the sweet spots are in the vocals. So you can kind of, with all of this, you can cut out the top and the bottom, get rid of all the low end rumble. This hand here, sorry, it's mirrored, and then the kind of the top end that's too hissy. You get rid of all that, your sound starts to get very warm. So again, I'll put a cheat sheet together of all of this stuff that basically it's just basic EQ for when you're recording your vocal, that you can just, you know, you can make it sound as professional as possible without a load of bells and whistles, you know.
Okay.
Podcast artwork, I've loads of stuff on that there. Again,
it's very important, isn't it?
It is very important because before anyone even listens to your podcast, they're going to look at it. They're going to read what's going on. So, but you want to keep it simple. You want to have the name of the podcast on it and some kind of an image that represents what's going on in your podcast. So there's just a couple of examples there, you know. But have a look at your favorite ones and ones that maybe you're kind of you're comparing yours or your idea to, you know, and see what's available there.
Would you use a designer for that?
I would use something very simple called Canva, which is canva.com, and they've loads of templates. And go in there and have a little mess around. If you have a budget, by all means, go and hire a graphic designer. But I think you'll have, if anyone's going to have a good idea as to what your podcast should look like in a small representation, you're going to know yourself. But do definitely ask somebody who's good at artwork, you know. Get creative.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I use Canva all the time and that, but I think a lot of them there, they look really well designed, and I think they're definitely graphically designed. So I think if
they stand out.
I think for me, it'd be worth investing in design.
And like a good idea is to look at it on your smartphone and what size it's going to be in your smartphone, because that's the size that people are going to see. It's very, very minuscule. So no small writing, because it's just not going to be visible, you know?
No. Yeah.
Podcast artwork, there's just some the kind of the basics as to what format they have to be uploaded in. So again, your podcast host will ask for these kind of things, you know. These are the standard requirements to make sure that your artwork is up to scratch. Podcast hosting, again, you pay a little subscription for any of these, monthly subscription, and they'll host your podcast for you. Acast, absolutely brilliant.
So can you because this was something I didn't really realize, explain quickly hosting as opposed to Apple. There's a go between, isn't there?
Yeah, of course. So these hosts you will upload your podcast to your host, and your host will then push it out to all the platforms. So they'll push it out to Apple, and they'll push it out to Spotify and all the other ones in between. So wherever people get their podcasts, any of these will push it out to pretty much all of them. I think Acast cover 90% of the platforms. So, and Acast are, I think it's about €15 a month for.
Okay, so that is a bit costly in the year, isn't it? So you need it. Can you put a podcast out without going through a host?
You can create your maybe a SoundCloud account and upload your audio there, and then you can push out that link to all your social channels. But again, like SoundCloud will cost you, like the more you upload, the less space you have. You have a free account up until a certain amount of gigabytes. Once you fill that, they're going to ask you to pay, and you can't upload anymore. So SoundCloud will cost you about €100 a year for an unlimited account. You can upload anything you want, but you're only really able to push it out to SoundCloud. You're not going to get it to Apple or Spotify. And the reality is, any podcast that's worth listening to is on Apple or it's on Spotify. They're the two big players in the podcast platform market. So, Apple especially being the biggest one, because anyone who has an Apple phone can access the Apple podcast directly on their phone without having to download a third-party application or anything.
So it's just to be aware that if you are going to do your podcast, that you're committing to monthly. Okay, it mightn't be that much, but if you're on a real budget, it is a commitment. Like, it's something that I don't like with websites and that. I think the charges are kind of less. So just to be aware of that you must, like, if you're going to be serious about it, you're going to have that charge. But they do take they take the work out of it for you, don't they? Like, once you put it up, it's all pushed out then, and you don't have to worry.
I think the first time you upload your podcast, it's kind of like Shazam. It'll scan it for anything that shouldn't be, broadcasted. Like if you're doing a music podcast, you can't just post you can't post 4 albums of Metallica on it and think you're going to get away with it. So they are particular about that kind of stuff as well. So just be wary of that. I think the law states that you can play, if you're doing a music podcast, you can play less than 30 seconds, but I think it's near 15 seconds of the music before it'll get flagged. Okay. So just be aware of stuff like that. But they're very meticulous. So you'll have to upload your podcast. They will what's called normalizing the audio. So if you ever listen to 2 podcasts, there's never a massive jump in the volume of one and then the next one's really low. They get the audio and they pull it to exactly or within a certain frame of audio. What would you call it? Like a bandwidth, so that when they're played back to back, that there's not this massive jump, in the audio. So they'll do that anyway before they upload it to the platforms. The first time you upload, it'll take about possibly 2 hours, but your next one will be faster, and the next one will be faster until eventually, after maybe 10 episodes, you'll upload your podcast, and within 20 minutes, it'll be on Apple podcasts. Okay.
And the reason is because they're almost trusting you now. Is that what it is?
Yes, they're like the go-between. It's just the first time it'll take a little bit of time for the algorithm to pull you in and integrate you to the system, but once you're in there, you're kind of, once they get the hooks into you, that's it, you're there now.
Okay, all right, what's up next?
What is up next? I've no idea. Every slide's a surprise now at this stage. ACX for authors.
Oh yeah, this is mine.
Yes.
So I knew when I put this webinar up and was promoting it, a couple of people had said to me about they were looking at not necessarily podcasts, but audiobooks. So they are either reading their own audiobooks or they're looking into it and some recordings. And I was just thinking, there's quite a lot of crossover between the recording and of podcasts and say audiobooks. And the site that, if you're going to look at that, the site is ACX that I know of. And that's like the back of Amazon's audiobooks. So you can, if you have self-published or you have the audio rights to something you've produced, a book or a novel, you go to that website and it is very simple to use. You can record yourself, or you can hire somebody through that site to do the recording. I did that I got the rights back for my first novel, December Girl. I went in there and I kind of advertised that I was looking for a narrator, and a narrator came along, a Northern Irish girl, and we did the podcast. We did the audiobook together. Basically, she took the script, she recorded it, I checked it, and it went up, and you do a split on royalties. So that's just such a good way if you have something that you're looking to put on an audiobook. didn't cost me then because we're splitting the royalties as the sales come in. So it's just a tip I wanted to put in there for that kind of format of audio, aside from podcasts. So if you check out the website, it will talk you through it. But again, if you're going to do the recording yourself, it has to be a certain standard, and they will check that at the end once you put up all your files. If they're not up to scratch, they won't let it go on the platform. So that's all I wanted to say on that. It was just like a little tip, acx.com. And it's a really cool kind of website, one of the best I've used.
So I'm just going to skip back to something there I saw. I can't find it now, but I came across a website yesterday that basically you can record your podcast within the website, and they will do all the dirty work, all the cleaning up of your audio, all the adding in and stuff. And I can't for the life of me remember.
Well, don't worry, because with that resource list that I'm working on, we'll add it in there. So we'll if you check my website.
I'm just scanning through the questions there, and there's a question about, is your podcast a labor of love? I mean, it depends on what level you really want to get at it. Honestly, if you believe in what you're going to do, then go for it. I'd always encourage that. If you're only in it to make money, then I probably wouldn't bother.
Just like writing.
Yeah, exactly. It's like anything, but if you're good at what you do and you believe in what you're doing, the money will come later. If you get your listenership up and your subscriptions up and that kind of stuff. And that's another thing as well is, sorry, there's another slide there, Nicola. Maybe before, I'll probably cut you off there. Were you on a roll?
No, I just wanted to finish out the slides and then just talk briefly on the last few points.
Yeah.
I put in writing podcast because this was a writing series, and I just asked I have a Facebook group, what's called Aspiring Authors Ireland and UK, which if anybody is looking to write novels who's listening today, you can go in there. But I asked people what they're listening to for writing, and this is the list: The Bestseller Experiment, Creative Pen, Creative Writers Toolbelt, Literary Friction, Page One podcast, Dead Headspace, Irish History podcast, which I mentioned earlier, History Extra podcast. That's a BBC production I've put in, but they've brilliant content in there. If you're in looking at screenwriting, I listen to the Bulletproof Screenwriting podcast, and I find that really excellent as well. Inside Books is an Irish podcast, which I was on. So if anyone wants to listen back to it, but it's different authors every week, and you get really good tips on how other people are doing their writing. And Murder One, which was the crime festival, they have all their talks from last year up online as well. So there's just some Irish ones, but just shows you the ton. I find you need to almost be recommended a podcast, don't you? It's almost hard sometimes to find what you're interested in, and once you're recommended one, you're hooked then.
Yeah, but like Apple should, and Spotify's algorithm is probably a little bit better than Apple's, but they tend to kind of, like Netflix, they'll base recommendations off of what you've already watched, and that's kind of how the algorithm kicks in and starts pushing out content that they reckon you like. So I mean, start listening to stuff, and it should be presented to you. That's kind of the way data works nowadays, If
you just want to switch on to the last one, because that's your contact details. I think that's the last one. But one thing I wanted to ask you, Ronan, was like that money making thing. What are your options to make money on a podcast? It's a Patreon and sponsorship. Is there any other way of and subscribers? Like, do you need a lot of subscribers to be successful, or how does that work?
It's the way the charts work. So, like what we were just talking about there, about the content being presented to you, is the way the algorithm works is it's based off your subscribers. So how many people are subscribing to the podcast, but not only that, how many people are subscribing to it on a regular basis. So is your audience growing, so that they can see the trajectory of your audience growing. But to get into the podcast charts, it's a little bit tricky. It's based on subscribers, but people might automatically download your episode every week. So maybe every Tuesday they have it set up that the podcast is downloaded to their device, but they don't necessarily listen to it. So the streaming way is that it's able to track how many people are actually listening to the podcast, but it also tracks how much of the podcast did they listen to. Did they turn off the podcast? Why did, at what time did they turn off the podcast? Are they maybe just what they're called drive-by listeners, where they're listening to that one particular podcast because of a particular bit of content within that podcast? So all these things come into are factored in together to create the podcast charts. Now, obviously, the podcasts like the Joe Rogan Show or Blind Boy are the ones that are just, they're at the peak of their game, the second captains. They tend to kind of never leave the top 40 of the podcast charts. But the podcast charts are also, you can go in and search per genre. So if there's a particular genre you want to look at, you can go in there and find out what's going on in those particular genres. So
that's something to bear in mind for your subscribers, and if you're looking to produce a podcast that does make money, that's the type of thing you're going to be looking at.
And also get people to rate the podcast, because obviously higher ratings will help with your rankings. And they also scan through the comments to see what people are saying. Like, are they positive comments? That also helps you to push you up the charts. So I guess to make money on your podcast, like, a lot of people go down the Patreon route or have sponsorship through Acast. Like, say for instance, the Tommy and Hector and Larita Blewett podcast is only 3-4 weeks old, but when it launched, they had their sponsor in place, and it's Now TV, and they have their own little jingle that they've written and sing at the start of it, to promote Now TV. They had that in place already, so they obviously been paid to do the podcast by their sponsor. That funds the time. Like, the thing that it's going to cost you most at the start is your time. You got to be committed to kind of giving up. I think there was a question there earlier on about how long does it take to put a podcast together. A half-hour podcast, I can have, once I'm sent the audio from the interview, I can have it recorded and ready for upload within 2 hours.
Okay, so 2 hours for 30 minutes, but that's you're very quick.
And I can edit in fast forward, so I can actually listen to the audio in fast forward and pick out what needs to be pulled out. If there's any pops and clicks or anything like that, tidy it up. If there's a lot of the time, the audio is only delivered in one audio file, so it's recording two people talking over each other, and that kind of has to be cleaned up, or you kind of have to pull some of that out. So a little tip there is, if you are interviewing somebody, let them finish speaking, leave a gap, and then when you leave a gap, the other person will naturally stop talking. Like, we'll do a little demonstration right now.
Oh, I'm not doing a demonstration right now.
So that kind of thing.
Okay, so you're saying leave a gap. Okay.
Leave a gap. So and then when you get to a certain level of a podcast, you can opt in to have it monetized, and they will drop adverts into your podcast. A lot of the podcast ads are literally for other podcasts. That's what I keep hearing as ads lately, is like, you'll be listening to Dave McWilliams and a podcast ad comes on for Blind Boys podcast, that kind of thing. So Patreon sponsorship, and then if you get to the level of second captains, I think they've like different tiers of subscription prices you can pay.
Okay, so that's what we're all aiming for. I'm going to finish up now because we've just come to the end, and I don't want to go on too long. But one thing to say is that if people are interested in going forward or producing it very professionally, you produce, so they can talk to you about that if they wanted to get some help or even some training, because you are looking at setting up a studio in the Northeast, for a podcast studio, isn't that right?
Yeah, I'm trying to get, and we're very close to actually hopefully getting it started and off the ground sooner rather than later, hopefully before the end of this year. A podcast studio dedicated to podcasting for the Northeast, and I'll be doing training for people. Right now is just quite difficult. I'd love to be able to teach a group of people in a room, but obviously we can't do that right now. So I'm going to look at trying to do it online. Do some editing demonstrations, that kind of stuff, and just show you just go through a podcast and from start to finish, show you what work's involved, and help people get their podcast off the ground. Because I think like the podcast I'm working on with Andrew, the Celtic Soul podcast, it's a brilliant concept, it's a brilliant idea, and these things need to be explored, and I encourage people to do that. Even if it falls on its arse down the line, then that's fine, but give it a go. Don't be afraid to give it a go. Seek help if you need it. It's easier than you think. If there's a particular part of it you're not too comfortable about, recording, editing, that can all be learned very, very easily.
Okay, so look out for that, I suppose, and the idea is that you eventually will be offering the training, and hopefully
be doing
sooner rather
training.
than later, so that people can come and learn it. And then, because I think it's the starting off, isn't it? Once you have it learned, then you can go and do it, and it can seem daunting at the start. So I think that's everything. I know people are saying the slides, but this will be available as a playback. And yeah, I'm going to have a links page. So nicolacassidy.com is my website. I'm going to have a resource page. It's just been worked on at the minute for all these webinars that we've done. And under each webinar, I'm linking everything that we talked about, because we so many links throughout and so many things to talk about. So that'll be the best place to follow up. Ronan, you're across all social medias, but usually Rojo Enemies.
Yeah,
Which I
that's
see I
me.
spelled completely wrong there. Sorry about that.
Oh my God,
so
you did indeed.
Yes.
And enemies.
Yeah, that doesn't sound good. So it's time to finish up. Thanks a million for everybody who's joined in, and it was a very kind of, I think, clued in audience. I think people who are listening really are. I think they're going to go ahead, I think, and set up their podcast, or maybe they have already. I think they're a dedicated audience, and wishing everybody the best of luck. And let us know what it is. Tweet us, and we'll tweet it out, because I'm always interested in new podcasts. For me, it's the end of the series of the So You Want to Write a webinar series with as part of my residency with Meath County Council Library Services. So thanks a million to everyone who's joined in over the past month. Thanks a million, Ronan, for taking part in the podcast today. We got through it, and we didn't fight too much, which is
no fighting.
box ahead of you now after this.
Who's picking up the kids, you or me?
Let's ring the babysitter. It's time for a glass of wine, I think.
I think so.
Thanks a million. And yeah, just check out for anyone that's missed anything, check out the playback. It'll be up on the website in the next week. And let us know when you do start your podcast, because we'd love to listen in. So thanks a million. Bye-bye.
Thank you.